According to Michael Kasky Blomain of CBSSports.com, this job, this head coach job for the Philadelphia 76ers belongs to Mike D'Antoni. It is his to lose, and it is looking like he is going to be the next head coach for the Philadelphia 76ers. Joel Embiid has given him his blessing, and this Sixers team really, really does need to play the new and evolved style of basketball, which is shoot shoot the three ball and defend well enough so you don't give up 130 points a game. So they're going to evolve to the outscoring aspect of the game. And according to Keith Pompey of the Philadelphia Inquirer, he said himself, according to multiple sources, Embiid is happy that he'll face the basket instead of posting up in D'Antoni's proposed five-out system. D'Antoni's plan is to move Tobias Harris back to the power forward. The 76ers will also make trades if he is hired, according to reports. The expectation is that he will have a say in picking players for his freewheeling style of play. So, with that said, and with that in mind, Mike D'Antoni will join the Philadelphia 76ers and trade for James Harden. You heard it here on Backseat Banter. We are predicting James Harden goes to the Philadelphia 76ers next season. Now, Ben, Brandon, let's talk the package. How can the Philadelphia 76ers make this trade work with the Houston Rockets?
Well, I think, first off, just pointing out a couple scenarios that could happen. Just want to quickly point out that moving Tobias Harris at the 4 is probably the best decision, in having Joel Embiid be a face-up center instead of back to the basket. We saw with Chris Bosh that was a good move for Chris Bosh in Miami, that he started to become a face-up player besides instead of coming back to the basket, which is going to transform Joel Embiid's offense, and I think it's going to give Philadelphia a lot more options. With that being said, trading for James Harden is going to be a little bit tricky due to obviously the cap room. Philadelphia have little to no cap. In fact, I'm pretty sure they're paying into the luxury tax. I don't think the same can be said about Houston. They might be on that edge if they have maybe a mid-level exception or a few maybe some budget. But it's going to be a little bit more difficult to trade for James Harden because you have to have the salary match up. What I think is going to be the best trade for both sides, and we'll just as salary matchups is James Harden. Obviously, you might want to throw in maybe a second-round pick or two, if you want to. If you maybe Philadelphia, I think Houston just gives straight up James Harden, right? Philadelphia would have to give up Josh Richardson, Ben Simmons, or Al Horford because they're almost on similar contracts, and probably throw in a pick or two and a trade exception to make this deal work. So that way they can really encompass this team, really make this encompass the trade and really make the salary stack up. Now, I said this could be the one scenario. The other scenario I see playing out is a third team involved, because I don't know how much I don't know how, Al Horford could be in play here. I don't know how much Philadelphia loves Al Horford and that contract anymore. I think that could be a move in a 3-team trade to really maybe get another star or maybe another piece for D'Antoni. Maybe a point guard that can run the floor like Ben Simmons would, and that's what they would be losing. Or maybe a two-way player and Josh Richardson, a guy that can shoot and play defense. I honestly think they might trade Al Horford, especially if he's going to be especially if Tobias Harris is going to be moving to the floor, because that does mean Al Horford is probably going to hit the bench. And we saw Al Horford's efficiency went way down this season. So with that being said, I honestly feel like a third team could be involved just to be just for cap relief, or to be a team that just takes on one of those bad contracts. like Al Horford's.
One of these teams probably would be a team that isn't going to be contending, and they can just take on
I wouldn't be
contracts at
surprised
ease.
if he gets moved back to either Atlanta or I could see that possibly happening. I could maybe see New York because New York probably has all the cap in the world. I mean, I don't know who they trade, but again, it's
One
another.
of their 10 power forwards.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you can just replace one with another.
Exactly.
I'm trying to think of other teams. Maybe Memphis, you can throw in a package. But
Okay, but let's not focus too much on
no, but
other teams here. Let's focus on the
trade is going to be Josh Richardson, Ben Simmons, and a trade exception, and maybe a pick or two for James Harden.
Yeah, I think that's probably it. I think, if you're, I like to see how like in Philadelphia's case, they're really centering around their center in Joel Embiid. Is I personally think he is I personally think he is a generational talent rather than someone like Ben Simmons. But I will say this: fitting everyone into same as this year for the Celtics, not for the Celtics, for the 76ers. Fitting everyone into that team is going to be incredibly different. Of course, look, Mike D'Antoni could throw anything. We've seen with 7 seconds or less. We've seen with the small ball lineup that they tried to use, and really, they played well at points, but it's going to be incredibly difficult. And I think what D'Antoni also has to look at besides this trade is being able to find people who are going to get on the bench for this team. It's going to be incredibly difficult to move on with Al Horford. It's going to be, I don't think they'll move on from Tobias Harris, but if they do, they have to get depth. We kind of talked about how Ben Simmons was looked at for the Cavaliers, and they thought they had a wealth of young talent to trade him. I thought if they were going to get rid of one of their stars before this kind of rumor came up, that if they were going to get rid of one of their stars, that would have probably been a great idea because, look, they get depth. They get something that they lacked severely. Look, and Furkan Korkmaz and Mike Scott are good players, and Shake Milton and Matt Stibio. But really, if they, you compare it to a team like Boston, you compare it to a team like Toronto, to a team like Miami, who, again, if they win, I'll never hear the end of. I think they also have to look at. I know really the most important thing is James Harden, who, look, it would be great to see him in the East, but it's going to be incredibly difficult. Number one, to fit him in. I know, Sam, you have an idea of how they're going to fit everyone in. But number two is they need a bench. They can't go on with this 4-star lineup, this 4 or 5-star lineup, and have no one on the bench.
Right.
Yeah.
So the thing I was going to mention there, the most likely trade, and I think Brandon touched on this, would have been James Harden for Ben Simmons and Josh Richardson. But if you look at their salaries, they don't actually match up because Ben Simmons is making $29 million, Richardson's making 10.8, while James Harden's making 41. So the way to account for that is Philadelphia, because of them trading James Ennis to Orlando, they got a $1.8 million trade exception. And that's where it factors in. And that trade exception, I think Brandon might have accidentally said that it would be traded to Houston. That's not really how it works. It's just they could absorb $1.8 million more in contract than they send out. That's pretty much the difference there. But it's an interesting package to look at, and you guys are right about how it's not enough for that team, right? Because, yes, you pair Harden and Embiid, and they're going to do some magic on the floor, but you got to have a bench. You got to have other guys that can come in and hit their shots because we've seen in the playoffs, 1-2 punch doesn't really work the same, right? Like Giannis and Middleton, that doesn't work as well in the playoffs as it does in the regular season. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. But one thing that's important is Mike D'Antoni's system did not work in Houston, right? It was great after for the regular season for stretches, but, it was picked apart by the Lakers. And we've seen this pretty much every year, right? It's great in the in the regular season. They make it to like the second round, sometimes like the third round, and then they just get exploited, right? So what makes you think that it'll work in Philly?
Okay, so addressing the bench issue. Mike D'Antoni has always found a way to get very, very young and good talent onto his team. I know we saw Montrezl Harrell on the Houston Rockets before they traded him to the Clippers eventually in that Chris Paul trade. But that just speaks to the amount of scouting and player development that Mike D'Antoni's system stands for. Montrezl Harrell did just win Sixth Man of the Year, and they do have an eye for good players. So for me, it all comes down to coaching here. And before this James Harden and Philly trade can even be possible, Mike D'Antoni needs to be the man in charge. And what we were saying earlier, when you move Tobias to the 4 and you put Joel Embiid in a position for him to play the type of basketball he actually wants to play, you create a fun environment and you create an environment that promotes winning. As we've seen in the Warriors, no team has more fun than the Warriors when they play basketball, because it is just so the energy passes from one player to another with ease. And I believe James Harden is one of these players that can change a franchise, even a contender. James Harden, I'm not knocking Clint Capella in any way, but Clint Capella is no Joel Embiid, not at all. So what the 76ers are going to do here is they're going to build the roster based on that dynamic duo. They're going to fill it with shooters. If they do decide to trade Al Horford instead of Ben Simmons, if they can pull that off.
I don't think the Rockets take that deal, though. Come on.
We don't know what's going to happen. James Harden could want out of there and force the hand of the franchise while also, trying to keep that team together. But I'm not sure how much Ben Simmons fits into that system, but I know Mike D'Antoni will find a way. So, Brandon, tell me, is this really realistic? And if so, what are your thoughts?
Well, just to kick it to go back to what Sam said really quickly. I wouldn't be surprised if Houston gets if there's a third team involved. So that way more pieces are involved. So that way teams will feel like, a little bit more structure, a little bit more, more balanced bench and all that kind of stuff. I think in Philadelphia's case, you kind of have to do that. So that's first off. I think there could be a third team involved to maybe move a bit more pieces around, so that way teams can feel a little bit more balanced. But in terms of system fit, obviously James Harden fits perfectly well in D'Antoni's system, and he's going to continue fitting well in D'Antoni's system. I mean, like we keep mentioning, this is his position to lose, and that was according to Elton Brand. Like, obviously, he's going to most likely, there's like a 90% chance that he's going to get this job. If he messes up somehow, it's on him, and I think this whole thing collapses. I don't think without D'Antoni, they don't get James Harden.
Mm-hmm.
For Houston's side, you look at it as
dude, you got to have a good reason to move on from a generational star like James Harden. You got to have a good reason for that.
I don't know how well it will fit in terms of Ben Simmons and Westbrook, but we got to remember, this isn't D'Antoni's system anymore. This isn't, we need 5 out. We need, we need PJ Tucker at the 5. Like, we don't need, a new coach is going to step in, whoever it may be.
Joel Embiid can stretch the floor.
We're talking about the Rockets right now.
I'm talking about the Rockets.
Sixers.
I know, but
I think the pairing is going to be so perfect in Philadelphia that they're going, like, this is going to be Philadelphia's probably best chance to win a title in the years to come if this move actually does happen.
Nah, what do you mean? I think they could win the title every year.
That's true. Same thing with fans.
But we were talking about some other pieces that they could possibly get to add on this team. But I do see a player like maybe Spencer Dinwiddie or a few other guys that are looking at the free agent market now. And if they do make a deal like this, they would just find players who can 3-and-D and take over if they need to be taken over.
Yeah, I mean, listen, and just going back to what for Houston, it's different for the fact that Houston, you know, Houston has been playing like a much up-tempo offense. They've been playing like that. I what I think is going to happen, and they still will. Like Josh Richardson and Ben Simmons can run the floor. What might happen though is that you might see them trade possibly like an Eric Gordon or a PJ Tucker to get a quality center. So that way they have that. Or sign one in free agency this year. I think though, I think yes, obviously Houston's probably getting the worst end of this deal because Ben Simmons can't shoot. Josh Richardson's always been spotty at times.
We don't know their coaching situation next season, though,
Is up
so
in
that's
the
going to
air
be a
as
big
well,
factor in this as well.
I'm sure Daryl Morey, before making any transition or any moves, is going to want to hire a coach, especially maybe before the draft as well, which is coming up in November. So I probably would expect Houston to find a head coach sooner rather than later, probably after the finals. But
isn't it great that we're in the finals and the draft is just around the corner?
yeah, I know.
Yeah. What's crazy is that right now, in a normal year, training camp would be starting.
Yeah.
And we haven't even played 1 minute of NBA finals.
Yeah, it's crazy, but those are the times that we live in. But to me, it's just going to be a trade that it's only going to happen if certain things play out, and the first thing that has to play out is D'Antoni being hired by the 76ers.
Right. All right, so I'm going to hop in real quick. And this is – we started touching on it a second ago – is not a normal offseason. This is not what you normally expect from a team or all teams to do. And let's not deny the implications that, the false offseason is going to have on teams going forward, right? The 130 days or whatever between the last NBA game that was played and the first game in the bubble. A lot of teams lost a lot of money because of this. We saw there was a few teams that didn't even get to travel to the bubble at all because they were, they didn't have enough wins to qualify to be in the bubble. So those teams already, they lost out on the revenue from ads and all of that from the bubble. And now the teams that are there are losing out on ticket sales because, like we were talking right now, Heat versus Lakers, those are two destination cities. People would be traveling across the country just to get a chance to watch one of those two teams play in person, right? Those tickets would be going for thousands of dollars each, right? So that's a lot of revenue that both teams are missing out on, and subsequently the NBA is missing out on. So the salary cap itself might not be as high as it was projected to be going into next year because we've seen every year the salary cap increases, but the league has not made as much money like they think they would have made because, the season itself is shortened and all the other things we were talking about. So I have a feeling that trades are going to be a lot more explosive than free agent signings in this offseason because teams are going to have to get a lot more creative with how they move around their pieces and whether they want to go into rebuilding mode or whether they want to try to contend. Because there's going to be less free agents on the board because more people are going to want to opt into their contracts because they're going to be higher than they can get in the open market because teams have less money to spend. So I think the trade market, like we're talking about, in any other offseason, I don't think a James Harden trade would even cross our minds. But the way that the league is going, that's where we're headed.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and follow our social medias for more updates. See you next time on Backseat Banter.